Coal smoke clings to everything in York railway station. It coats the wooden beams overhead, settles into the folds of Clara Whitfield's apron, and laces the smell of fresh bread with a metallic bitterness that has become so familiar she no longer notices it. What she notices is the counter beneath her fingers, the grain of the wood, worn smooth in the places where she sets down plates 100 times a day, rough and splintering in the corners where no hand reaches. And beneath that, the vibration of a locomotive releasing steam 3 platforms away, a low tremor that travels up through the floorboards and into her wrists, a sound she feels more than hears. It is 9:30 in the evening. The last train to Leeds has departed. The tea room is empty except for Mr. Barnaby, who has fallen asleep in his usual corner with a cup of cold tea balanced on his chest. Clara wipes the counter with a rag that has been wrung out so many times it feels like parchment. Her braid, dark as the coal dust in the air, has loosened over the course of 12 hours, and a strand falls across her cheek each time she leans forward. She pushes it back with the back of her wrist, a gesture so automatic it has become involuntary. £3.07. The number sits behind her eyes, the way a prayer sits behind the lips of someone who has forgotten how to pray, but not why. £3.07, saved over 22 months of mending trousers for railway workers, hemming skirts for the station master's wife, and serving bread and tea to travellers who never look at her face. £3.07. The sum she needs to rent a shop on Gillygate Street is 15. She is not close. She is not far. She is exactly where determination has carried her, and determination, she has learned, carries you at the pace of a woman walking in shoes with holes in the soles. The bell above the door rings. Clara does not look up immediately. She continues wiping the counter because the bell has rung 1,000 times, and the person who enters is always someone who wants tea or directions or a warm place to sit. It is never anyone who matters to the trajectory of her life. When she does look up, she sees a man standing just inside the doorway. He is tall, with the kind of posture that suggests he has never once been told to stand up straight. He simply has never considered slouching. His coat is dark wool, well cut, the fabric finer than anything sold in York's tailor shops. His boots are leather, scuffed from travel, but unmistakably made by someone who measured his feet individually. His hair is the colour of wheat that has been left in the field too long, not quite gold, not quite brown. His face carries the particular expression of a man who has been hungry for longer than he is willing to admit, and is calculating whether pride or necessity will win the war currently being fought behind his jaw. Clara has seen hunger before. She has seen it in the eyes of the boys who sweep the platforms, in the way Mr. Barnaby's hands shake when he lifts his cup. She has seen it in her own reflection on the mornings when the bread costs a halfpenny more than it did the week before. Hunger has a posture, a slight forward lean, a tension in the shoulders, a careful way of not looking at food directly. This man has all of it, layered beneath a composure so practiced it is almost convincing. He approaches the counter. His eyes scan the chalkboard behind her where the prices are written. She watches his gaze move from item to item, and she sees the moment his hand moves toward his coat pocket, and then stops. The hand returns to his side. His expression does not change. He straightens his already straight spine. "Are you still serving?" he asks. His voice is low, controlled, the kind of voice that gives orders in rooms where no one would think to disobey. It is also the kind of voice that has just asked a question it already knows the answer to. "The kitchen is closed," Clara says. "But there's bread and cheese from supper. I can bring a plate." He looks at her for the first time, not at her face, at her hands, which are still holding the rag. He looks at her hands the way a man who has been trained to assess quality looks at fabric. Then he looks at her face. Dark eyes meet dark eyes, and for a moment the station is silent except for the distant hiss of cooling engines. "How much?" he asks. "On the house," Clara says, because she has already seen the way his hand stopped at his pocket, and she has already decided what this means. Something changes in his face. It is not anger, exactly. It is the expression of a man who has been offered something he cannot repay, and for whom the inability to repay is a wound deeper than hunger. His chin lifts by a fraction of an inch. "I did not ask for your charity," he says. The words are precise, each one placed like a stone in a wall. There is no cruelty in them, but there is something harder than cruelty, a boundary so absolute it has the quality of a physical structure. Clara does not flinch. She does not apologize. She does not retract the offer. She reaches beneath the counter and produces a plate that was meant to be her own supper. 2 slices of bread, a wedge of cheese, a small apple. She sets it on the counter. Then she takes a knife, cuts the bread down the middle, takes 1/2 for herself, and pushes the plate toward him. She bites into her half. She chews. She does not look at him. The man stands at the counter for what feels like a very long time. The locomotive outside releases another breath of steam. Mr. Barnaby shifts in his sleep, and his cup slides an inch toward the edge of the table, but does not fall. The clock above the chalkboard ticks through 9 seconds. He sits down. He does not thank her. She does not expect him to. He eats the way a man eats when he has decided that accepting something is not the same as asking for it, carefully, without haste, without looking at the person who provided it. Clara eats her half and watches the rain begin to streak the windows. She can see his reflection in the glass, the way his shoulders drop a fraction when the bread reaches his stomach, the way his jaw unclenches by a degree so small that only someone who has watched hungry people eat would notice. "You work here," he says. It is not a question. "I sew," Clara says. "This pays the rent. Sewing pays for the rest." "What do you sew?" "Everything. Trousers, skirts, shirts. I can recut a coat so well the owner thinks it was always that shape. I can mend a seam so it's stronger than the original." She pauses. "I can identify any fabric by touch. Linen, wool, cotton, silk, and I can tell you whether the silk came from Spitalfields or Lyon before I've opened my eyes." He is looking at her again. Not at her hands this time, at her face, at the way she speaks about her work with a precision that mirrors his own composure. There is something in his expression that was not there before. Not warmth, not yet, but a crack in the wall, a hairline fracture where curiosity has begun to seep through. "And you save," he says. £3, 7, she says without thinking. The number leaves her mouth the way a password leaves the mouth of someone who has been repeating it to themselves for months. She feels the exposure immediately, the vulnerability of having shown a stranger the exact measurement of her ambition. He is quiet. He eats the cheese. He holds the apple for a moment, turning it in his fingers, and Clara sees the signet ring on his smallest finger, gold, with a crest she does not recognize but whose quality she can read even in the dim lamplight. The ring is the kind of object that does not belong in a railway tea room. It belongs in a room with portraits on the walls. £3, 7, he repeats. For what? A shop on Gillygate Street. £15 for the first year's rent. She meets his eyes. "I'll get there." "Will you?" It is not a question. It is not a doubt. It is something else. A man testing the weight of a claim he has heard before, perhaps from his own reflection. "I will," Clara says. He puts the apple down. He has not eaten it. He pushes it back across the counter toward her, and this time the gesture is not charity in either direction. It is a man who has taken half a meal and is leaving the rest because he understands, perhaps for the first time in a very long time, what it cost her to share it. He stands, he straightens his coat, and then he does something Clara does not expect. He reaches into his coat and produces a card, cream-colored, engraved, the kind of card that announces a person before they enter a room. He places it on the counter between them. Edmund Ashworth, Duke of Harlow, Ashworth Hall, Yorkshire. Clara looks at the card. She looks at him. She does not curtsy. She does not apologize for not having curtsied. She picks up the card and reads it again, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something she recognizes from her own world. "You're a long way from your hall, Your Grace," she says. "My carriage broke an axle on the Tadcaster Road. I walked." He pauses. "I do not make a habit of accepting meals from strangers. I don't make a habit of giving them," Clara says. "You looked hungry." Something crosses his face. Not a smile, but the ghost of what a smile might look like if it were allowed to exist in the architecture of that expression. It passes quickly. "You said anyone can learn anything," he says. "Your words, not mine. I heard you say them to the boy who sweeps Platform 3 last Tuesday." Clara blinks. He was here last Tuesday. She did not see him. She sees everyone. "You were listening." "I am always listening. It is the only skill my station requires that I did not have to be taught." He picks up the apple again, weighs it in his hand, and this time he bites into it. He chews. He swallows. 7 days, he says. Clara waits. 7 days at Ashworth Hall. I will teach you what it means to move through my world. Ride, dance, converse, navigate a room where everyone is watching and no one is kind. At the end of 7 days, there is a small gathering at the hall. Investors, neighbors, people whose opinions determine the shape of a county. If you can conduct yourself as a lady, not as a seamstress pretending, but as a lady, and not one of them suspects what you are, I will fund your shop. The full £15, the first year's rent, the materials, whatever you need to begin. Clara's heart beats once, hard against her ribs. £3, 7, 15. The distance between her life and her dream, measured in a number, and this man has just offered to close it in 7 days. "And if I fail?" she asks. He looks at her. The crack in the wall is still there, and behind it she can see something she did not expect. Not contempt, not amusement, but a kind of weariness, as though he has watched someone try this before and is bracing himself for the familiar shape of the outcome. "If you fail," he says, "you return to your needle. And you say, to no one in particular, that station is not a choice, that some doors do not open no matter how hard you push." Clara puts the card in her apron pocket. She picks up the plate, the knife, the rag. She moves through the motions of closing the tea room, banking the fire, turning down the lamps, checking the lock on the door, while the Duke of Harlow stands in the centre of the room and watches her with the patience of a man who has already calculated the outcome and is merely waiting for the world to confirm his arithmetic. "Tomorrow morning," Clara says. "What time?" 6. "A carriage will come for you." He moves toward the door. Then he stops. He does not turn around, but his voice comes back to her through the empty room. Quieter now, stripped of the precision that armored it before. "The bread was good." The door closes behind him. The bell rings once and is silent. Clara stands behind the counter with the taste of her half of the meal still on her tongue and the weight of a duke's card in her pocket. And she feels the vibration of the last locomotive of the evening as it passes through the station without stopping, carrying someone else toward a destination that is not hers, not yet. £3, 7, or 15, in 7 days. The number changes depending on whether her hands are fast enough, her spine is straight enough, and her will is stubborn enough to walk into a world that was not built for her and convince it she belongs. She locks the door. She walks home through the rain, and the rain does not touch her. The carriage arrives at 12 minutes past 6. Clara knows this because she's been standing at the window of her room above the bakery since 5:43, dressed in the only clean clothes she owns, a grey cotton dress she has taken in and let out so many times the seams have the layered quality of a map. A white apron, she starched with flour and water at 4 in the morning, and a shawl the colour of smoke that she has embroidered along the border with a pattern of leaves so fine you would need to hold it to the light to see them. Her hair is braided and pinned in a crown around her head, dark against the pale of her neck, every strand in place, because if there is one thing she knows how to control, it is thread. The carriage is black, drawn by 2 bay horses, and it is the kind of vehicle that causes the baker's wife to part her curtains and press her face to the glass. Clara descends the stairs with her bag, a single canvas satchel containing a second dress, a needle case, 3 spools of thread, and the £3.07 she has saved, wrapped in a handkerchief and pinned to the inside of the bag where no one can reach it without her feeling the absence of weight. The driver does not speak to her. He opens the door, she steps inside, and the carriage moves through the streets of York in the grey half-light of a Yorkshire morning. Clara watches the city pass, the Minster's towers dissolving into low cloud, the narrow overhang of the Shambles, where the butchers are already setting out their cuts, the River Ouse sliding beneath Lendal Bridge like an animal that has not yet decided whether to be calm. She presses her fingertips to the velvet of the seat. She has never touched velvet before. The pile is shorter than she expected, denser, and she files this information away the way a soldier files away the layout of unfamiliar terrain. Ashworth Hall rises from the landscape 20 minutes south of the city. It is not the largest house Clara has seen. She has seen Castle Howard from a distance, and Harewood, and the great houses that sit on the edges of Yorkshire like sleeping animals. But Ashworth Hall has a quality that those houses do not. It looks lived in. The ivy on the east wing is not decorative but territorial, and the windows are clean but not gleaming, as though the person who ordered them cleaned cares about function more than impression. The stables are larger than the house seems to require. The gardens are precise, but not extravagant. Everything about the place speaks of a person who maintains what he has not, because he loves it, but because stopping would be an admission that he cannot. The carriage stops. A footman in green livery opens the door. Clara steps out onto gravel that crunches beneath her shoes with a sound like small bones breaking. The front door opens before she reaches it, and the Duke of Harlow is standing in the entrance hall. He looks different in his own house. The hunger has been replaced by something harder to read, a vigilance, a state of being perpetually braced, as though the walls themselves might at any moment demand something of him he is not prepared to give. He is dressed in a riding coat of dark green, and his hair is damp, as though he has been outside already this morning. His boots are clean. The signet ring is on his finger. "Miss Whitfield," he says. "Not your grace, not my lord." He is addressing her as an equal, or as close to an equal, as the architecture of his world allows. "This is Mrs. Haggerty. She will show you to your room. Breakfast is in 30 minutes. We begin after." Mrs. Haggerty is a woman of about 50, with the figure of a barrel and the eyes of a sparrow. Small, bright, and missing nothing. She leads Clara up a staircase whose banister is oak worn smooth by generations of hands, down a corridor lined with portraits of Ashworths, who all share the same jaw and the same expression of controlled indifference. Clara's room is at the end of the corridor. It is small, clean, and contains a bed, a washstand, a wardrobe, and a window that looks out over the stables. She sets her bag on the bed. She takes out the needle case and sets it on the washstand, where she can see it. Then she sits on the edge of the bed and presses her palms flat against the mattress and breathes. £3, 7, 15 in 7 days. She says the numbers in her mind the way she would say a stitch count, not as a prayer, but as a measurement, a fact about the world that she intends to change through the application of her hands. The room is quiet. The stable clock strikes the half-hour. Clara stands, unpacks her second dress, hangs it in the wardrobe, and goes down to breakfast. The dining room is long and narrow, lit by windows on one side and a fire on the other. The table is set for 2. The Duke sits at the head. He does not stand when she enters, but he nods toward the chair to his right, and Clara sits. The food is already on the table. Eggs, toast, kidneys, tea, and the quantity of it makes Clara's throat tighten. She has not eaten a breakfast like this since her mother was alive. She serves herself. She does not fill her plate. She takes exactly what she would take at home, 1 egg, 1 piece of toast, a cup of tea, and begins to eat. The Duke watches her do this. He says nothing, but she can feel his attention on her hands, the way she felt the vibration of the locomotive through the counter, a pressure without a source. "You eat like someone who is used to less," he says. "I eat like someone who doesn't waste what she has," Clara says. He looks at her for a moment. Then he takes a second helping of kidneys, and Clara understands that this is his way of acknowledging that she has just described a principle he recognizes but does not practice. After breakfast, he leads her through the house. The tour is not hospitality. It is orientation, delivered with the efficiency of a military briefing. Here is the drawing room, where you will receive guests. Here is the library, where you will study. Here is the music room, where you will learn to sit at a piano without looking as though the instrument frightens you. Here is the gallery, where you will walk as though you have walked it 1,000 times. Here is the ballroom, small by London standards, large by Yorkshire standards, and empty in the way that large rooms are empty when they are waiting for something to fill them. Clara memorizes the layout the way she memorizes a pattern, by landmark, by distance, by the relationship between one space and the next. Left at the portrait of the man with the scar, right at the window that faces south, straight through the door with the brass handle shaped like a fox's head. She builds the house in her mind as a series of connected spaces, each one a stitch in a larger seam. They end in the library. The Duke closes the door. The room smells of leather and old paper, and the fire has been lit by someone who entered and exited without leaving any trace of their presence other than warmth. "Sit," he says. Clara sits in a chair by the fire. He remains standing. He moves to the window, where the morning light catches the edge of his profile, and Clara sees for the first time that there are lines around his eyes that do not belong to a man in his early 30s. They are the lines of someone who has spent years looking at things he cannot change. "The wager," he says, "let me be precise, so that neither of us can claim misunderstanding. In 7 days there will be a gathering in this house, 12 guests. They are landowners, investors, the kind of people whose approval or disapproval determines whether a project in this county lives or dies. They are not kind people. They are not cruel people. They are observant people, and observation, in my experience, is more dangerous than either kindness or cruelty." He turns from the window. "If, at the end of that evening, not one of those 12 people has identified you as anything other than a woman of breeding and education, the wager is yours. £15 and whatever additional sum you require to establish your shop. If any one of them suspects, not confirms, merely suspects, that you are not what you appear to be, you return to York, to your needle, and you say the words, 'Station is not a choice.'" Clara's hands are still in her lap. She has not moved. The fire pops behind her, and a log shifts, sending a spray of sparks up the chimney. "What do I learn?" she asks. "Everything," the Duke says. "How to walk into a room, how to hold a cup, how to sit, how to stand, how to listen. How to ride, because we will arrive on horseback and they will watch you dismount. How to dance, because there will be music and you will be asked. How to speak about subjects you have never encountered. How to be silent about subjects you know too well." He pauses. "How to be invisible in plain sight." Clara looks at the books on the shelves behind him. She cannot read the titles from this distance, but she can see the shapes of the spines. Tall, short, leather, cloth, gold lettering, no lettering. A library is a map of a person's mind, and this one tells her that the Duke of Harlow reads broadly, carelessly, and without any apparent system, which means he reads because he wants to, not because he was told to. "And you believe I can learn all of this in 7 days?" she says. It is not a question. It is a test. She wants to see what he says, because what he says will tell her whether he wants her to succeed or wants her to fail. He meets her eyes. "I believe you will try," he says. "Whether trying is enough is what the wager is designed to discover." The morning passes in a blur of instruction. He teaches her how to hold a teacup, not with both hands, not with the little finger extended, but with 3 fingers and a thumb, the handle resting in the curve between index and middle. He teaches her how to enter a room, left foot first, weight forward, the door opened wide enough to pass without turning sideways. He teaches her how to sit in a drawing room, ankles crossed, spine straight but not rigid, hands folded in the lap unless holding something, and even then, the object held lightly, as though it might at any moment become unimportant. Clara learns. She learns the way she learns a new stitch, not by understanding the theory, but by repeating the motion, until her body remembers what her mind has already accepted. By noon, her fingers know the teacup. By 1 o'clock, her feet know the doorway. By 2, she has walked the length of the gallery 6 times, and on the 6th, the Duke does not correct her posture. 3 pounds, 7, or 15 in 6 days now. The number shifts, and Clara shifts with it. By the 3rd day, Clara has learned to walk, sit, paw, and hold a conversation about the weather that sounds neither forced nor disingenuous. She has learned that the correct response to a compliment is not gratitude, but deflection, and that the correct response to an insult is not anger, but a pause long enough to suggest that the insult was too insignificant to register. She has learned that in the Duke's world, power is not displayed. It is implied through the quality of one's silence and the precision of one's inattention. What she has not learned is how to ride. The stables are the Duke's cathedral. Clara discovers this on the morning of the 3rd day, when he leads her across the yard to a building that smells of hay and leather and the warm animal musk of horses. The interior is dim, and the light that enters through the high windows falls in shafts that illuminate individual stalls like paintings. There are 6 horses. Each one is named, and the Duke speaks their names the way a parent speaks the names of children, with a familiarity that assumes the names are known and loved. "This is Juniper," he says, stopping at the stall of a bay mare with a white blaze. "She is patient. She is also stubborn. She will not move unless she believes you mean it." Clara looks at Juniper. Juniper looks at Clara. The horse's eyes are large and dark, and there is something in them that Clara recognizes, a quality of assessment, of deciding whether the person in front of her is worth obeying. Clara has seen this look in the eyes of customers, in the eyes of the station master, in her own eyes when she looks in the mirror on mornings when the number in her savings has not changed. "She'll do," Clara says. The Duke lifts her onto the saddle. The act is impersonal, his hands at her waist, a lift that is more practical than gentle, and then she is above him, gripping the pommel with hands that know fabric but not leather, and the horse shifts beneath her in a way that makes her stomach drop. 3 pounds, 7. She holds the number in her mind the way she holds the reins, too tightly, the Duke says, and he reaches up and adjusts her fingers, loosening them, spreading them, and his hands are warm and brief and gone before she can catalogue the sensation. Juniper does not move. Clara sits. The saddle creaks. The stable smells of dust and iron. And then, without warning, Juniper steps forward, and Clara's body lurches, and she grips the pommel again. And the Duke says nothing, because nothing is what the moment requires. The first lesson lasts 20 minutes. Clara walks Juniper in a circle in the yard, while the Duke watches from the center, his arms folded, his expression unreadable. She falls twice. The first time she lands on her hip, and the breath goes out of her in a sound that is not quite a gasp. The second time she lands on her hands, and the gravel cuts her palm, and she feels the sting travel up her arm and settle in her shoulder. She gets up. Both times she gets up. She does not look at the Duke when she does, because looking at him would make the act of rising a performance rather than a refusal, and she needs it to be a refusal to accept that the ground is where she belongs. The second lesson is that evening. The Duke has changed into a coat that is less formal, and his sleeves are rolled to the elbow, and Clara sees his forearms for the first time, ropey with the kind of muscle that comes not from labor, but from riding, from years of gripping reins and holding the weight of an animal between his knees. He carries a riding crop, but he does not use it. He uses his voice, and his voice does what the crop would do. It directs, corrects, and on one occasion, when Juniper refuses to turn left, it commands, and the horse turns. Clara watches the way he speaks to the horse. She notices that he never raises his voice. He never repeats himself. He says a word, and the horse responds, and the silence between the command and the response is filled with a communication that has nothing to do with sound. It is the language of expectation. The Duke expects to be obeyed, and the horse obeys, and neither of them questions this arrangement because neither of them has ever been given a reason to. That night, Clara lies in her bed at Ashworth Hall and stares at the ceiling. Her hip aches where she fell. Her palm throbs where the gravel cut it. Her legs feel as though someone has taken them apart and reassembled them incorrectly. She turns the events of the day over in her mind, the way she turns a piece of fabric before cutting, examining it from every angle, looking for the grain, the bias, the direction in which it wants to fall. The Duke does not want her to fail. This is what she has decided. He does not want her to fail because if she fails, his thesis, that station is fixed, that birth determines capacity, remains intact. And Clara has begun to suspect that the Duke does not want his thesis to remain intact. She has seen the way he looks at the portraits in the gallery, not with pride, but with something closer to endurance, as though the faces of his ancestors are a weight he carries on his shoulders rather than a banner he raises above his head. She has seen the way he enters rooms he does not want to enter and speaks to people he does not want to speak to, and she has recognized, with the clarity of someone who has spent her entire life watching people who are trapped, that the Duke of Harlow is trapped. The difference between his cage and hers is that his is gilded. But a cage is a cage, and the bars are no less real for being made of gold. On the fourth morning, Clara enters the breakfast room and finds a book on her chair. It is small, leather-bound, and titled A Guide to the Conduct of Ladies in Society. There is no note. The book is old, the spine cracked, the pages yellowed, the margins annotated in a hand that is not the Duke's, but that shares the same angular precision. Someone else has read this book. Someone else has underlined passages and written notes in the margins, and on one page drawn a small, careful sketch of a woman dancing, the pencil lines so light they are almost invisible. Clara opens the book. The annotations are in a feminine hand. The writing is precise but not rigid, the letters leaning forward as though rushing toward the next word. In the margin of the chapter on conversation, the annotator has written, "They listen for what you do not say, say less." Clara closes the book. She holds it in her lap during breakfast, and the Duke does not mention it, and she does not ask. But the silence between them has changed. It is no longer the silence of instruction, but the silence of something being shared without being named. The riding lesson that morning is different. Clara mounts Juniper without assistance. She does not grip the pommel. She holds the reins the way the Duke holds his, loosely, with the expectation that the horse will respond. And Juniper responds, walking in a circle that is rounder and steadier than the day before. The Duke stands at the center and watches, and this time his arms are not folded. His hands are at his sides, and Clara sees the fingers of his right hand move, a small, involuntary motion, as though he is reaching for something that is not there. 3 pounds, 7, or 15, in 3 days. She turns Juniper to the left. The horse turns without hesitation. Clara feels the shift in her own body, the alignment of hip and knee and ankle that yesterday was impossible and today is merely difficult. And she understands, with the sudden clarity of a needle finding the gap between 2 threads, that she is not learning to ride. She is learning to trust her body, to know what her mind has already accepted. That evening, the Duke teaches her to dance. The music room has a small pianoforte, and he plays, simply without flourish, the kind of playing that suggests he learned because the skill was expected and not because it brought him joy. Clara stands in the center of the room, and the Duke sets the music and crosses to her, and he takes her hand, and his hand is dry and warm, and his grip is the grip of a man who is holding a piece of porcelain he has been told not to break. He places his other hand on her waist. The touch is so light she feels it more as warmth than pressure. They begin to move, and Clara counts in her head, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and on the 4th count she steps on his foot, and he does not flinch, and on the 8th count she steps on his foot again, and he adjusts his stride so that her foot lands on empty floor instead of leather, and the correction is so seamless she does not realize he has made it until 3 measures later, when she notices that the rhythm has changed, and she is no longer counting. She is dancing. The Duke looks at her. His face is close enough that she can see the ring of grey in his left iris, close enough that she can smell the soap on his skin and the leather of his coat, and beneath both, something that is just him. A scent she cannot name because she has never encountered it before and will not encounter again. His expression has not changed, but the crack in the wall has widened, and what she sees through it is not curiosity anymore. It is recognition. The 5th day begins before dawn. Clara wakes to the sound of the stable clock striking 4 and lies in the dark, listening to the silence that follows, a silence so complete it has texture, the texture of a house holding its breath. She rises, dresses, and descends the staircase in the dark, her hand on the banister, her feet finding each step by memory. She has walked this staircase 19 times now, and her body knows it the way her fingers know a seam. The yard is cold. Frost clings to the cobbles, and Clara's breath comes out in clouds that dissolve before they reach the iron railings. She crosses to the stables, and the smell of hay hits her like a wall, warm, dry, alive. Juniper is awake. The horse turns her head when Clara enters the stall, and Clara places her hand on the mare's neck and feels the pulse beneath the skin, steady and slow, the heartbeat of an animal that does not know what a wager is and would not care if it did. She saddles Juniper herself. She has watched the Duke do it 3 times, and her hands that have been threading needles and knotting thread since she was 6 years old, replicate the motions with a precision that surprises even her. The girth strap is the hardest part. It requires strength she does not have in the directions the buckle demands, and she has to brace her knee against the horse's side and pull with her whole body, and the strap slides through the buckle with a sound like a whispered curse. She leads Juniper into the yard. The sky is the color of a bruise, purple and yellow at the edges where the sun is considering rising. Clara mounts. The saddle is cold against her legs, and the frost on the leather melts beneath her weight, soaking through her skirt in patches she will feel for the rest of the morning. She does not care. She takes the reins, and Juniper walks, and Clara rides out of the yard and onto the path that leads through the east field toward the ridge. She has never ridden alone. The Duke has always been present, in the center of the yard, at the edge of the field, his voice a compass that kept her oriented. Without him, the world is larger. The fields stretch out on either side of the path, and the hedgerows are dark shapes that could be anything, and the sky is enormous, and Clara is small beneath it, and Juniper's hooves strike the frozen ground with a sound like a clock that has been running since before she was born. She trots. The motion jars her spine and sends pain through her hips and down her legs, and she grips with her thighs and leans forward the way the Duke taught her, and the pain becomes rhythm, and the rhythm becomes speed, and suddenly Juniper is cantering, and Clara is cantering with her, and the wind is in her face, and the fields are a blur, and the number in her head, 3 pounds, 7, is gone, replaced by something that has no number, something that is just the feeling of moving through space, at a speed her own legs could never produce. She rides to the ridge. From there, she can see Ashworth Hall below, the house, the stables, the gardens, the long drive that leads to the road. She can see the smoke rising from the kitchen chimney. She can see in the distance the towers of York Minster grey against the grey sky. And she can see a figure standing in the yard below, a figure too far away to have a face, but whose posture she recognizes. Straight, still, watchful, the posture of a man who has been standing there long enough for the frost to settle on the shoulders of his coat. The Duke has been watching. He has been watching since she left the stables. And Clara knows this because the figure does not move, does not turn, does not go inside. It stands in the yard and watches her on the ridge, and the distance between them is the distance of a wager that has stopped being about money and started being about something neither of them has named. The 6th day is the longest. The Duke informs Clara at breakfast that they will ride together, not in the yard, not in the field, but across country, the kind of riding that the guests at the gathering will expect a lady to have done and to speak of without affectation. He means to test her, and Clara knows he means to test her, and she eats her toast and says nothing and goes to the stables. They ride for 2 hours. The route takes them through the East Field, across a stream that requires Juniper to climb the far bank, and along a ridge path where the wind is sharp enough to make Clara's eyes water. The Duke rides ahead on a gelding called Atlas, a horse so large and so dark that he looks like a hole in the landscape. The Duke rides the way he does everything, without visible effort, without excess motion, his body and the horse's body moving as a single mechanism. Clara follows. She follows not because she cannot lead, but because the path is narrow and the footing uncertain, and because following is, in this moment, the smarter choice. She watches the Duke's posture, the way he leans forward on the uphill, the way he sits back on the descent, the way his hands move on the reins with a subtlety that is almost surgical. She copies him, not consciously. Her body has learned to read his body, the way her hands have learned to read fabric, by instinct and repetition, and the kind of attention that comes from caring too much about the outcome. They reach a stretch of open ground. The Duke turns in the saddle. Trot to the oak. Turn. Canter back. Clara trots. Juniper's hooves beat a rhythm on the turf, and Clara rises and falls with the motion, her body finding the syncopation that has eluded her for 3 days. She reaches the oak. She turns. She urges Juniper into a canter, and the horse responds, and the ground flows beneath them, and Clara's hands are steady on the reins, and her legs are firm against the mare's sides, and the wind pulls her braid loose, and dark hair streams behind her like a flag. She stops in front of the Duke. She is breathing hard. Her cheeks are flushed, her eyes bright, her hair a mess. She is, by the standards of his world, a disaster. She is, by the standards of her own, a woman who has just cantered across a Yorkshire field on a horse she could not mount 4 days ago. The Duke looks at her. The crack in the wall is no longer a crack. It is an opening, and through it Clara can see something that makes her chest tighten, not admiration, which she could dismiss, and not pity, which she could refuse, but something far more dangerous: pride. The Duke of Harlow is looking at her with pride, and the pride is not the condescension of a teacher for a student, but the recognition of an equal for an equal, and it terrifies her more than the horse ever did. Again, he says, but his voice is different. It is softer by a degree, rougher by another, and Clara hears in it the sound of a man who has just discovered that the thesis he has built his life around might be wrong. She turns Juniper. She trots. She canters. She turns. She canters back. And each time, the Duke's face changes by increments so small that only someone who has spent 6 days learning to read his silences would notice. 3 pounds, 7, or 15 in 1 day. The number is no longer a measurement. It is a countdown. The morning of the 7th day, Clara wakes and does not recognize the ceiling. This is because the ceiling of her room at Ashworth Hall has become the ceiling she expects, and the ceiling of her room above the bakery in York has become the one that surprises her. Then she remembers that she is still at the hall, that the gathering is tonight, and that in approximately 14 hours, 12 people will enter this house and study her the way a tailor studies a bolt of cloth, looking for flaws, for inconsistencies, for the place where the weave is not what it claims to be. She sits up. Her body aches in places she did not know could ache. The insides of her knees, the muscles along her spine, the arches of her feet. 6 days of riding, dancing, walking, and sitting in the particular way the Duke has taught her have remade her body the way 6 days of continuous stitching remakes a piece of cloth. She is the same material, but the shape has changed. She dresses with care. The second dress, the one she brought from York, is not adequate, and she has known this since the second day. Last night, after the riding lesson, she sat in her room with her needle case and the lamp turned low, and she altered the dress. She took in the waist, let out the hem, reset the sleeves at a slightly different angle, and added a collar of white cotton that she pleated by hand in the pattern she has seen on the dresses of the women in the portraits in the gallery. The result is not a lady's dress. It is a seamstress's dress that has been rebuilt by a seamstress who knows exactly what a lady's dress looks like and has used that knowledge to create a forgery so precise that the difference is invisible to anyone who does not know where to look. She pins her hair. She washes her face. She looks at herself in the mirror above the washstand, and the woman who looks back is not the woman who entered a railway tea room 6 days ago with £3 and 7 shillings in her pocket and a Duke's card she did not know how to read. The woman in the mirror is someone else, someone who sits straighter, holds her chin higher, and moves her hands with a deliberateness that is not learned but earned. She goes down to breakfast. The Duke is already at the table, but he is not eating. He is standing at the window, looking out at the drive, and his hands are behind his back, and Clara can see the tension in his shoulders, a tension she has not seen since the first morning when he stood in the entrance hall, braced against his own house. "Your Grace," she says. She uses the title for the first time since she arrived. She uses it not because the situation demands it, but because she wants him to hear it in her mouth, wants him to understand that she knows what tonight means, and that she is not pretending it does not matter. He turns, he looks at her. His face goes through a sequence of expressions so quickly that only someone who has spent 6 days learning to read his silences would catch them. Surprise, assessment, and then something that he suppresses before it can fully form. Something that Clara suspects but cannot confirm is the same thing she saw on the ridge. "You altered the dress," he says. "I'm a seamstress," Clara says. "It's what I do." He almost smiles. The almost is closer than it has ever been, and the fact that it does not arrive makes it more significant than if it had. A smile is a release, but an almost smile is a struggle, and struggle means the outcome is not predetermined. The day passes in preparation. The Duke drills her on names, the 12 guests, their histories, their alliances, their feuds, the subjects that are safe and the subjects that are landmines. Clara memorizes them the way she memorizes a pattern by association and repetition. Sir Aldrich Pellow, who breeds sheep and despises anyone who does not. Lady Margaret Fosdyke, who was born a Colquitt and has never let anyone forget it. Mr. Thaddeus Crane, who invested in the railway and lost nothing because he never invests until everyone else has proven the ground is solid. Mrs. Honoria Blythe, who speaks 4 languages and uses each one to say things she would not dare say in the others. By 4 o'clock, Clara can recite the 12 names, their preferences, their grudges, and the precise angle at which to tilt her head when each one speaks to her. By 5, she has practiced entering the drawing room 6 times, and on the 6th, the Duke does not correct her. By 6, she is dressed, her hair is pinned, her hands are steady, and the clock in the entrance hall is counting down the minutes with a slowness that feels deliberate. The first carriage arrives at 7. Clara stands in the drawing room. The fire is lit. The candles are lit. Mrs. Haggerty has arranged flowers on the mantelpiece, white roses from the garden, their scent barely perceptible beneath the heavier smell of beeswax and coal. The Duke stands beside the fireplace, and his posture is the posture Clara has seen in the portraits, the controlled indifference, the expression of a man who is present in a room without being of it. But his eyes are on her, and in his eyes she sees the thing she has been building toward for 7 days. Not belief, which would be too strong, and not hope, which would be too weak, but the willingness to be wrong. The Duke of Harlow is standing in his drawing room, watching a seamstress from York, prepared to deceive 12 of the most observant people in Yorkshire, and for the first time in 6 days, his face does not say she will fail. His face says, perhaps. The guests arrive in a procession of carriages and gusts of October wind. Clara receives them. She curtsies, not deeply, not shallowly, the exact depth the Duke has taught her, the depth that says, I acknowledge your position without conceding my own. She speaks. She says the things he has taught her to say, the weather, the journey, the pleasure of making your acquaintance, and she says them with a fluency that is not false but constructed, the way a well-made garment is constructed, from pieces that are individually unremarkable, but together create the impression of seamlessness. Sir Aldrich Pellow shakes her hand and does not look twice. Lady Margaret Fosdyke inclines her head and says something in French that Clara understands, because the Duke taught her 3 phrases and the body language that accompanies each one. Mr. Thaddeus Crane studies her over the rim of his sherry glass and says nothing, which is what Mr. Thaddeus Crane always does, and Clara's silence in response is so perfectly calibrated that Crane almost nods. Mrs. Honoria Blythe is the last to arrive. She enters the drawing room like a ship entering harbour, slow, deliberate, displacing the air around her. She is 50, handsome, and her eyes are the pale blue of a winter sky, and they land on Clara with the precision of a needle finding a vein. "And who," Mrs. Blythe says, "is this?" The Duke opens his mouth. Clara speaks first. "Clara Whitfield," she says. "I'm staying with His Grace. The autumn in Yorkshire is more beautiful than I was led to believe." Mrs. Blythe's eyes do not leave her face. Clara holds the gaze. She does not blink, she does not smile. She stands in the posture the Duke has taught her, weight on the left foot, right shoulder slightly back, chin level, and she waits. "You ride," Mrs. Blythe says. "It is not a question." "I've had the opportunity," Clara says. "Opportunity," Mrs. Blythe repeats. The word sits between them like a stone. Mrs. Blythe picks up a glass of sherry from the tray a footman offers and turns away, and Clara cannot tell whether the turn is dismissal or withdrawal, and the uncertainty is the most dangerous thing she has felt all evening. The dinner begins. Clara sits. She eats. She holds her fork the way the Duke taught her, and her knife, and her wine glass, and she listens to the conversation around her with the particular quality of attention the Duke has described, listening not to respond, but to understand, and understanding not to agree, but to navigate. When Sir Aldrich speaks about his sheep, Clara asks a question about the quality of Yorkshire wool versus Lincolnshire, and the question is so specific that Sir Aldrich's eyebrows rise and he spends the next 4 minutes explaining the difference with an enthusiasm he has not displayed at a dinner table in years. When Lady Margaret mentions the railway, Clara says nothing. When Mr. Crane mentions the harvest, Clara says nothing. When Mrs. Blythe mentions the theatre in York, Clara says, "I understand the new production is quite ambitious." And Mrs. Blythe's pale eyes find her again, and this time there is something in them that was not there before, not suspicion, not yet, but the shadow of it. The shadow of a woman who has been watching a performance and has not yet decided whether it is a performance. The dessert course is cleared. The ladies withdraw to the drawing room. Clara goes with them, and in the drawing room she sits and drinks tea and speaks when spoken to and is silent when not, and the silence is the silence the Duke taught her. The silence that implies rather than states, that suggests depth without displaying it. The gentlemen join them 20 minutes later. The Duke enters the drawing room, and his eyes find Clara immediately, and Clara sees in his face the answer to the question she has been asking herself for the past 3 hours. She has not been caught. The evening continues. There is music. Lady Margaret plays the pianoforte with technical precision and no feeling. Sir Aldrich sings in a baritone that has been worn smooth by years of port. And then the Duke turns to Clara and says, in a voice that is loud enough for the room to hear, "Miss Whitfield, would you do us the honour?" Clara has not played the pianoforte in 6 days. She has not played it in 6 years. Her mother taught her when she was a child, before the consumption took the strength from her fingers and the money from the house, and Clara has not touched a keyboard since. But the Duke is looking at her, and Mrs. Blythe is looking at her, and the room is looking at her, and Clara stands and crosses to the pianoforte, and sits and places her fingers on the keys. She plays. She plays a simple piece, a waltz her mother loved, a piece that requires more feeling than technique, and her fingers find the keys the way her fingers find fabric, by touch and memory and the kind of knowledge that lives in the hands rather than the head. The notes are not perfect. 2 are flat, 1 is late. But the melody carries and the feeling carries, and when she finishes, the silence that follows is not the silence of judgment, but the silence of people who have been listening with something other than their ears. Mrs. Blythe is the first to speak. "Where did you learn to play?" she asks. "My mother," Clara says. "Your mother," Mrs. Blythe repeats. And then she does something Clara does not expect. She nods. Not the nod of approval, not the nod of dismissal. The nod of a woman who has just heard something she recognizes, and the recognition has told her more than any interrogation could. The evening ends. The guests depart in their carriages. Clara stands in the entrance hall beside the Duke and watches the last carriage disappear down the drive, and the night closes in around the house, and the candles gutter, and Mrs. Haggerty begins to extinguish the lamps. Clara turns to the Duke. He is looking at her. The wall is gone. Not cracked, not open, gone. And what Clara sees behind it is not the thing she expected, not pride or satisfaction or relief. It is awe. The Duke of Harlow is looking at Clara Whitfield with awe, and the awe is the most human thing she has seen on his face since the night he ate half her bread in a railway tea-room and called it good. "Sir Aldrich," the Duke says, "he asked me how long you've been riding. What did you tell him?" "I told him you've been riding since you were a child." He pauses. "I lied. I have never lied to Sir Aldrich in my life. He would have known if I were lying. He did not know." Clara's hands are shaking. She clasps them in front of her, the way he taught her, and the shaking stops, and she stands in the entrance hall of Ashworth Hall and waits for the words that will end the wager. "Not one of them suspected," the Duke says. "Not one." He stops. His jaw works. "You won, Miss Whitfield. The wager is yours. £3. 7. No. 15. The number completes itself in her mind like a seam closing, and Clara feels the weight of it, not the weight of money, which she has always known how to carry, but the weight of having proven something that matters more than money, something that she cannot hold in her hands or pin to the inside of a bag. She has proven that a door can open. 2 days after the gathering, Clara is still at Ashworth Hall. The Duke has not asked her to leave. Clara has not suggested she should. There is an understanding between them that has not been spoken, an understanding that lives in the space between what is said and what is meant, in the way the Duke passes her the teacup at breakfast with his left hand, because he has noticed, without being told, without comment, that she is right-handed, and the cup is easier to receive from the left. The money has been arranged. The Duke produced £15 in banknotes the morning after the gathering and placed them on the breakfast table beside Clara's plate with the same impersonal efficiency with which he once lifted her onto Juniper's back. Clara took the notes, folded them once and placed them in the pocket of her dress. She did not count them. She did not need to. The Duke's word, she has learned, is a currency more reliable than sterling. But the shop on Gillygate Street will not be ready for weeks. There is the lease to sign, the premises to clean, the materials to purchase, the sign to paint. And so Clara remains at Ashworth Hall, and the days settle into a rhythm that is neither instruction nor wager, but something else. Something that has no name, because neither of them has been brave enough to name it. On the third morning after the gathering, Clara finds a tear in the Duke's riding coat. She finds it because she finds everything: the frayed edge of a cuff, the loose button on a waistcoat, the stitch that has come undone in a seam that holds together the architecture of a man's appearance. She finds these things the way a musician finds a wrong note, instinctively, involuntarily. With a part of her brain that never stops working, she takes the coat. She does not ask permission. She takes it from the chair in the library where he has draped it, carries it to her room, and sits by the window with her needle case and a spool of dark thread, and she mends the tear with stitches so small and so even that when she returns the coat to the chair, the tear is invisible. The Duke does not mention the coat, but the next morning Clara finds a book on her chair at the breakfast table, a volume of poetry this time, not a guide to conduct. It is by Wordsworth, and the pages fall open to a poem about the countryside around Tintern, and Clara reads it while she eats her toast and feels the words settle into her mind like sediment settling to the bottom of a still pool. On the fifth morning she mends a shirt. On the sixth she resets a button on his riding jacket. On the seventh she finds a tear in the lining of his evening coat, and she turns the coat inside out and sews the lining with stitches that are not invisible but beautiful, a row of tiny, perfect crosses that no one will ever see because they are on the inside, where only the wearer knows they exist. The Duke begins leaving things for her to mend, not deliberately. Clara can tell the difference between a man who is leaving things and a man who has stopped hiding the things that need mending. A coat on the back of a chair, a waistcoat on the library table, a shirt on the banister, as though it was carried upstairs and then forgotten, or as though the person carrying it decided halfway up that the seamstress in the guest room might find it there. Clara mends everything. She mends with the precision and the patience of a woman who has been sewing since she was 6, who has mended the clothes of railway workers and station masters and the baker's wife and herself, and who has never mended a man's clothes with the particular quality of attention she brings to the Duke's garments. She mends his clothes the way she would mend a flag, not because the fabric is valuable, but because what it represents is. On the 8th morning, she is sitting in the library with his riding coat in her lap when the Duke enters and stops. He looks at the coat. He looks at her. His face does something she has never seen it do. It falters. The composure that has been his armor for as long as she has known him develops a crack that is not the crack of curiosity or the opening of recognition, but something rawer, something that looks, for a moment, like pain. "You don't have to do that," he says. "I know," Clara says. She does not look up from the coat. Her needle moves in and out of the fabric, pulling the thread through, creating the small, even stitches that are her signature. The signature of a woman who has decided that the things she touches will be better when she is done with them than when she began. The Duke crosses the room. He sits in the chair across from her. He does not speak. He watches her sew, and Clara feels his attention on her hands, the way she has felt it since the first morning. Warm, steady. The attention of a man who has spent his life being attended to, and is only now discovering what it feels like to be attended to by someone who expects nothing in return. "Tell me about your shop," he says. Clara looks up. His face has recovered. The composure is back. But the rawness is still there, beneath it, like the lining she has just mended, invisible to anyone who does not know where to look. "It will be on Gillygate Street," she says. "The front room will be the shop. I'll sell dresses, skirts, blouses, nothing extravagant. Practical things, beautiful things, things that a woman can wear to work and to church and to a dinner if she needs to. The back room will be my workroom. I'll have a table by the window and a dress form and a shelf for my threads. She pauses. The needle moves. And a chair by the door for anyone who wants to wait. Who would wait? Anyone. Everyone. Women who want to talk while I work. Women who want to watch. Women who have never seen someone make something from nothing and want to see how it's done. The Duke is quiet. The fire pops. The clock on the mantelpiece ticks through 10 seconds. I used to paint, he says. Clara's needle stops. She looks at him. He is not looking at her. He is looking at the fire, and his face is the face of a man who has just opened a door he has kept locked for a very long time and is not sure what will come through it. When I was 17, he says, I painted landscapes, the fields, the ridge, the stream. I painted the way you sew, because my hands could not be still, and because the things I made with them were the only things that felt like mine. He stops. His jaw tightens. My father found the canvases, he burned them. He said a duke does not create, a duke owns what others create. The library is silent. The fire hisses. Clara holds the coat in her lap and holds the duke's words in her mind. And the two things, the coat and the words, are the same thing, because both are acts of making, and both have been broken, and both are in the process of being mended. £3, 7. Clara says. It is the first time she has said the number aloud to him. It comes out quiet, almost a whisper, and it sounds different in the air than it does in her head, less like a measurement and more like a confession. What? The Duke says. That's what I had, when you met me. £3 and 7 shillings. I said it to myself every night before I went to sleep like a prayer, not because I thought the number would change by itself, but because I needed to remember that it existed, that I had made it, that it was mine. The Duke looks at her. The rawness is no longer beneath the surface. It is on the surface, and Clara can see it clearly, the face of a man who burned his own canvases because his father told him to, who has spent 15 years owning things and making nothing, who is sitting across from a woman who has spent her entire life making things and owning nothing, and who is beginning to understand that the distance between them is not a distance of station or wealth, but a distance of courage. She resumes sewing. The needle moves. The Duke watches, and the silence between them is no longer the silence of instruction or wager or even recognition. It is the silence of two people who have seen each other clearly and have not looked away. On the 10th day after the gathering, Clara rides Juniper to the ridge alone. It is early, earlier than she has ever ridden, early enough that the frost is still white on the grass and the air tastes of iron and cold earth. She rides because the Duke is not at breakfast, and Mrs. Haggerty tells her without looking up from the kettle that His Grace has gone to York on business and will not return until evening. Clara knows this is not business. She knows because the Duke has not left Ashworth Hall in 10 days, because he has found reasons to remain that have nothing to do with instruction and everything to do with the woman who is still in his guest room, and because a man who has spent 10 days finding reasons to stay does not leave suddenly without the leaving meaning something. She rides to the ridge. She sits on Juniper and looks out over the fields, and the fields are the same, gold and brown and green, the hedgerows dark, the sky enormous. But Clara is different, and the difference is not in her posture or her hands or her ability to sit a horse without gripping the pommel. The difference is in her chest, where a feeling has been growing for days that she has refused to name because naming it would make it real, and real things can be lost. £3, 7, 15. The numbers are wrong now, both of them. The first is too small, the second is insufficient, and neither of them measures what she is actually afraid of losing. She rides back. She spends the day in the library, reading the Wordsworth he left for her, and in the afternoon she takes out her needle case and begins to sew. Not his clothes, not her dress, but something new, a handkerchief. White cotton, the finest she has, and she embroiders it with a pattern of leaves so small and so precise that each one is a world unto itself, a universe of green thread on white fabric, and she sews because sewing is the thing she does when she cannot say what she means, and the needle can say it for her. 42. The number comes to her without warning, rising from a place so deep in her memory it has the quality of a dream. 42 stitches in a French seam. Her mother's voice, low and patient, the voice of a woman who was already ill and did not know it yet, or did know and chose to spend her remaining breath on her daughter's education rather than her own grief. 42 stitches, Clara. That's all a seam needs. Fewer and it pulls. More and it's bulky. 42 is the number that holds. Clara has not thought of this number in years. It comes to her now because the seam she is trying to hold is not made of fabric. It is made of 10 days and 7 before them, and a wager that stopped being a wager somewhere between the first riding lesson and the first dance. And she needs the number because the number is the only thing she has that is steady enough to anchor the feeling in her chest. 42. The Duke returns at dusk. Clara hears the carriage on the drive, hears the front door, hears his boots in the entrance hall. She does not go down. She remains in the library by the fire with the handkerchief in her lap and the needle moving. He enters the library. He does not speak. He crosses to the window where the last light of the day is dying against the glass, and he stands there with his back to her, and Clara can see the tension in his shoulders, the same tension she saw on the morning of the gathering, the tension of a man braced against his own house. I went to York, he says. I know. I went to Gillygate Street. He pauses. The shop. I went to see it. Clara's needle stops. It's a good building, he says. The front room has a window that faces south. The light will be excellent for sewing. The back room is small but adequate. There is a yard behind the building where you could grow herbs if you wanted. He turns from the window. His face is in shadow and Clara cannot read it, and the not reading is worse than any expression he could wear. I spoke to the owner. The lease is available. I told him I would pay the first year on behalf of the tenant. You already gave me the £15, Clara says. This is separate. This is not the wager. This is... He stops. His jaw works. The Duke of Harlow, who has never in 10 days struggled to find a word, is standing in the library of his own house, searching for a word the way a man searches for a light in the dark. Not because he doesn't know where it is, but because he is afraid of what he will see when he finds it. 42, Clara says. She does not know why she says it. The word comes out of her mouth the way the number £3.7 used to come out, not as a statement, but as an anchor, a thing to hold when the ground is moving. The Duke looks at her. What? 42 stitches in a French seam. My mother taught me. She said 42 is the number that holds. Clara looks at the handkerchief in her lap. I've been trying to hold something together for 10 days, and I don't know if the seam is strong enough. The Duke crosses the room. He sits in the chair across from her, the same chair where he sat when she mended his coat, and the distance between them is the distance of a table and a lifetime, and a wager that has been paid but has not ended. I burned my canvases, he says. My father told me to, and I did. I was 17. I did not hesitate. I picked them up and carried them to the fire, and I put them in, and I watched them burn, and I did not say a word. I have never... His voice breaks. It is a clean break, like thread snapping under too much tension, and the sound of it is the most human sound Clara has ever heard. I have never painted again. Clara puts down the handkerchief. She puts down the needle. She looks at the Duke of Harlow, and what she sees is not the man who ate half her bread in a railway tea-room, not the man who taught her to ride and dance and hold a teacup, not the man who stood in the yard and watched her canter across a field with something in his eyes that was not admiration. What she sees is a boy of 17, standing in front of a fire, watching the only thing he ever made burn, and choosing to never make anything again. You hesitated, Clara says. You hesitated when you should have fought. Yes. I don't hesitate, Clara says. That's the difference between us. You were taught that your station requires you to stop, and I was taught that my station requires me to keep going. You burned your canvases. I saved my £3.07. You stopped painting. I kept sewing. She pauses. I'm still sewing. The Duke looks at her hands. They are in her lap, still, the needle set aside, the handkerchief unfinished. He looks at her hands the way he looked at them the first night, assessing, measuring, but what he is measuring has changed. He is no longer measuring the quality of her work. He is measuring the distance between her hands and his, and the distance is small, and it is closing. I went to Gillygate Street, he says again. Not for you, for me. I needed to see the place where you will go when you leave here, because the thought of you leaving has become... He stops again. The word he cannot find is somewhere in the space between them, and Clara can feel it the way she can feel the grain of fabric through her fingertips, a thing that exists even though it cannot be seen. Stay, he says. The word is not a command. It is not a request. It is the sound of a man who has spent 15 years not making anything, discovering that the thing he wants to make most is a life that includes a woman who mended his coat without being asked. Clara picks up the handkerchief. She picks up the needle. She sews one more leaf, the 42nd stitch, the one that holds the seam, and she sets the handkerchief on the table between them. Teach me to paint, she says. The Duke stares at her. You taught me to ride. You taught me to dance. You taught me to walk into a room full of people who were not kind and convince them I belonged. She meets his eyes. Now I teach you. I teach you that a door can open from either side. I teach you that a man who burns his canvases at 17 is not a man who cannot paint. He is a man who stopped. And stopping is not the same as failing. Stopping is a choice, and choices can be unmade. The fire hisses, the clock ticks, the handkerchief lies on the table between them, white cotton and green thread, 42 stitches holding a seam that has been pulling for 15 years. The Duke reaches across the table. He does not take her hand. He takes the handkerchief. He holds it in his fist, and the fabric bunches, and the stitches strain. And Clara watches and does not flinch because she knows, she has always known, that 42 stitches hold. He unfolds his hand. The handkerchief is whole. The stitches are whole. The seam is whole. When? He says. Tomorrow, Clara says. Outside the library window, the October wind moves through the gardens of Ashworth Hall, and the white roses on the mantelpiece open 1 degree further, and the night settles over Yorkshire like a hand settling over a piece of fabric before the first cut. The morning Clara leaves Ashworth Hall, she does not leave alone. The Duke drives the carriage himself. No footman, no driver, just his hands on the reins, and Clara beside him on the seat, and the road to York unspooling before them like a thread pulled from a spool. The day is cold and clear, the kind of October day that Yorkshire reserves for departures, when the air is sharp enough to cut, and the sky is the pale blue of an eye that has been crying and has stopped. They do not speak for the first 20 minutes. The carriage moves through the countryside, past the fields Clara has ridden across, past the ridge where she cantered with her hair streaming behind her, past the stream where Juniper climbed the bank. Clara watches it pass the way she watches a finished garment, with satisfaction and with the particular sadness of knowing that the making is done. I have a condition, Clara says. The Duke does not look at her. His eyes are on the road. You are not in a position to make conditions. You won the wager. This is not about the wager. This is about the shop. Speak. The 4th chair, Clara says. In the back room of the shop, there will be 3 chairs, one for me, one for a customer, one for whoever wants to watch. I want a 4th chair. I want it to be yours. I want you to come to the shop on Saturdays and sit in the 4th chair and paint. The Duke's hands tighten on the reins. The horses feel the shift and adjust their stride, and the carriage sways, and Clara braces her hand on the seat, and the touch of her hand on the velvet is the touch of a woman who has learned to hold on to things that are moving. "I have not painted in 15 years, the Duke says. "I have not ridden a horse in my life until 6 days ago." Clara pauses. "You taught me that trying is enough. You said those words. In the library, on the first day, you said, 'I believe you will try.' Whether trying is enough is what the wager is designed to discover. The wager is over. I tried. It was enough. Now you try." The road descends into York. The minster appears above the rooftops, grey and gold in the morning light. The streets narrow, and the smell of coal and bread and horse and river reaches Clara through the window, and the smell is the smell of her city, the city that made her, and she breathes it in the way she breathed in the hay of the Ashworth stables, deeply, greedily, with the lungs of a woman who has been holding her breath for 10 days without knowing it. The carriage stops on Gillygate Street. The building is there, brick, 2 stories, a window that faces south. Clara can see the window from the street, and the light coming through it is the light she described to the Duke in the library, the light that will be excellent for sewing. She steps down from the carriage. She stands on the pavement and looks at the building, and the building looks back, and the space between them is the space between a dream and its shape. The Duke descends. He stands beside her. He does not look at the building. He looks at Clara, and Clara can feel his gaze on the side of her face, the way she has felt it since the first morning. "Warm, steady, present. Miss Whitfield," he says. His voice is low, and it carries the weight of everything he has not said in 10 days, everything he has been holding behind the wall that is no longer there. Clara turns to him. "I did not care about the wager," he says. The words come out uneven, stripped of the precision that has armored them for 16 days. "I cared about watching you refuse to kneel. I cared about the bread you shared with a stranger who told you he did not want it. I cared about the way you got up every time you fell, and the way you mended my coat without being asked, and the way you said £3.7 as though the number were a declaration of war against a world that told you to accept what you had." He stops. His breathing is uneven. Clara can see the pulse in his throat, the movement of his jaw, the way his hands, those hands that held the reins in the teacup and her waist in the music room, are trembling at his sides. "I have spent my life owning things," he says. "I have never made anything. I burned the only thing I ever made, and I called it duty, and I have hidden behind that word for 15 years. You walked into my house with a canvas bag and a needle case, and you made, in 7 days, something I have never been able to make in 32 years. You made yourself, and I—" Clara kisses him. She kisses him because waiting for him to finish would be another form of hesitation, and Clara Whitfield does not hesitate. She kisses him in the street, on Gillygate Street, in front of the building that will be her shop, in the October light. And the kiss is not the kiss of a fairy tale. It is the kiss of a woman whose lips are chapped from the wind, and a man whose jaw is rough with stubble, and whose mouth tastes of tea and the metallic edge of a fear that has just been set down. It is clumsy and tilted, and their noses bump, and Clara's hand comes up to his collar and grips the fabric she mended 3 days ago, and the stitch holds, and the kiss holds, and the street holds them the way a seam holds. Not perfectly, not beautifully, but with the stubbornness of 42 stitches that refuse to let go. The Duke's hand finds the back of her neck. His fingers are cold from the reins. Her braid has loosened, as it always loosens, and a strand of dark hair falls across his wrist. He does not push it away. They separate. The street is empty except for a boy sweeping the pavement across the road, who has stopped sweeping and is watching them with the frank curiosity of someone who has never seen a duke kissed on a public street and suspects he will not see it again. Clara looks at the Duke. His face is flushed. His composure is shattered, and what remains is not the controlled indifference of a man who has been trained to never show weakness, but the raw, unguarded face of a man who has just been kissed by a woman who was not supposed to be in his world, and who has, by the act of kissing him, redrawn the boundaries of that world so completely that the old map is useless. "Saturdays," Clara says. "The fourth chair. Bring your paints." The Duke looks at her. He looks at the shop. He looks at the south-facing window, and then he does something Clara has seen him do exactly once before, on the ridge, the morning she cantered across the field with her hair streaming behind her, and his face said, perhaps. He smiles. It is not the ghost of a smile. It is not an almost smile. It is a smile that reaches his eyes and stays there, and the grey ring in his left iris catches the October light, and Clara sees in that smile the boy who painted landscapes and burned them, and is standing, at 32, on a street in York, being offered a second chance by a seamstress with calloused hands and £3.07 and a fourth chair. "I will bring the paints," he says. "I will bring the canvases. I will sit in the fourth chair, and I will paint badly, and you will tell me it is good, and I will not believe you, and I will come back the following Saturday and paint again. And I will sew," Clara says, "and you will watch, and we will make things, together." The boy across the street resumes sweeping. A carriage passes. The Minster bell strikes 10. Clara Whitfield stands on Gillygate Street in the city of York, beside a duke who has just agreed to unmake the choice that defined him. And the morning opens before them like a cut of fabric on a table, unmarked, unshaped, waiting for the first stitch. She takes his hand. She does not let go. They walk to the door of the shop, and the key is in her pocket, and the light through the south window falls on the empty floor of the room that will be her life, and the life is not yet made, but it is begun, and begun is enough. £3, 7, 42 stitches, £15, one shop, one fourth chair, one Saturday, one man who stopped painting and one woman who never stopped sewing, standing in a doorway in York, in October, in the light. If this story moved you, if you found yourself holding your breath on the ridge, or gripping the edge of your seat at the gathering, or reaching for a needle you don't own, then do the one thing Clara would do. Don't hesitate. Subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment. Tell us which moment held you the way 42 stitches hold a seam. Was it the bread, the fall, the silence in the library, the kiss on Gillygate Street? Share this story with someone who needs to hear that a door can open from either side. And if you believe, as Clara believes, that trying is enough, then come back next week. There will be another story. There will always be another story. York, England, the city where Clara and Edmund's story unfolds, is one of England's most historic and atmospheric places. Founded by the Romans in 71 AD as Iberacum, it became a major Viking settlement called Jorvik before evolving into the medieval city whose walls and streets still stand today. The Shambles, a narrow street of overhanging timber-framed buildings originally housing butcher shops, is so well preserved that it looks almost exactly as it did in the Victorian era, and some say it inspired Diagon Alley in Harry Potter. During the 1840s, York became one of Britain's most important railway hubs, with the railway works employing thousands and transforming the city into the industrial crossroads of the north. The station where Clara served tea and met her duke was part of this transformation, a place where the old world of aristocratic estates and the new world of steam and industry collided every time a train pulled in.